There's this strange idea some people have regarding media and how they believe since a story is written by someone, then that means it's free reign to extrapolate what they feel to be representative of the creator. After all, the story should carry one's ideals and values, right? It wouldn't go against anything the creator thinks. Well, that's not entirely true. While stories inherently have some of the creators in them, it's not clear-cut in what they agree and don't agree with. You'll see many people go out of their way to assert something they feel to be problematic to be reflective of the creator. Perhaps the most popular example in the anime community being that of the Pervert character, or one of similar ilk in Japanese media. You'll see the likes of Sanji, Mineta, Moroku, etc. be disdained at times for their actions. People have a right to not like them for what personally bothers them, but it's another thing entirely when someone will say it reflects upon the creator and their beliefs. First of all, not realizing it's a different culture from which you need to look at it from that lens. Something Craftsdwarf brings up in the anime Pervert and the danger of normalization. Perversity in Japanese media is to invoke childishness, and not something most portrayals are actively endorsing by its mere inclusion. Oftentimes, it's there at the pervert's expense, in failing to satisfy their sexual desires through childish acts, or it's there to show how they need to overcome their perverse nature to not end up alone and or achieve their goals. With that in mind, we can examine this tweet as a launching point, made complaining about Asa's harassment of Sister Lily. I should note that the person in question who posted this deleted it, whether it just be because of the heat they got for it or something they came to disagree with, I wouldn't know, but I still believe it to be a valid example of the kinds of discourse around these types of characters. At the time at least, they called Tabata an obnoxious idiot because he found Asa's actions funny, which is already making an assumption that Tabata thinks it's funny in the first place, with no evidence, and the scene itself doesn't condone the actions presented. The other characters think he's an idiot for his advancements, and he's punished every time, whereas the girls who do like Asta are the girls he's been genuine with, and never once acted like a pervert towards. Obviously I can't know who Asta ends up with in the end, or if with anyone, but as is, he actively has no chance with Sister Lily. Tabata could think it's funny, sure, but that's not something we actually know. Even if he does, calling him an idiot is telling of you failing to grasp even the basics. Also, perverted characters, or characters who contain similar aspects as established, are common in Japanese media, and many of them have things to learn from attached to their actions. Shonen are aimed at a younger audience after all, who may need that kind of lesson. In terms of a currently running Jump title, you have a character like Mineta, who needs to put being a hero before his perverted desires, shown in his Chadley battle against Midnight, where he says, "The boobs can wait." If he'd done the opposite, then he'd have failed. The conflict hints at where his arc needs to go. We even have someone like Naruto, who is a bit closer to Asta in his relationship with Sakura. In his younger days, he had a crush on her, but it wasn't real love, and a huge part of it was born from a desire to surpass Sasuke. That's why he ends up with Hinata instead. They end up building an actual relationship, where Naruto learns what real love is. His days of crushing on Sakura were even becoming less frequent as the series went on, showing how he's matured. Yu Yu Hakusho also has Yusuke progress his relationship with Keiko when he begins to take it seriously, rather than being a doofus about it. Inuyasha is a series written by a woman, and it too has Moroku be a pervert who needs to move past that in order to be with Sango. Yamcha in Dragon Ball Z is actually an example of someone ending up alone, because he wasn't someone who took his relationship seriously. He was said to have cheated on Bulma with other girls, and despite the chances Bulma gave him, he never changed. And as we know, he gets cucked by Vegeta, as a result, ending up alone. Through trying to understand the culture of Japan, we can see how these kinds of characters aren't what some might initially assume, and it also shows part of why you shouldn't make an assumption of a creator. Since there's always that chance, you'll just straight up miss what they're going for in their story. A video entitled Madoka Magica is a dumpster fire masterpiece falls into this very trap. The person making the video brings up the minds behind the series, and says they may not have had pure intentions when making it, using a quote where Urobuchi talks about how the series was founded on being a darker take on the Mahou Shoujo genre, but throughout the video, fails to understand Madoka. She sees the series as merely punishing young girls and being you reap what you sow, trying to make arguments that Madoka is making a mockery of the genre, despite the series actually being about how these young girls need to grow by moving past their naive understandings of what maturity is. When trying to use their wishes, they often do it for what they believe to be the best for others, but in reality, are merely relying on a flawed system to avoid the struggle of overcoming their own issues. Sayaka being a character who thought they were fine with just healing Kyosuke and ignoring her own feelings. Her inability to confess, or at least try to move past those feelings, caused her to become a witch. Something intended to be selfless birthed jealousy and resentment when Hitomi made Kyosuke hers by having the strength to confess. Success or failure, she was willing to face it. Madoka and Homura being more entangled in this idea of maturity. Madoka trying to be selfless for the sake of the world was something upset by Homura, because she didn't understand how Homura felt. Madoka was a girl who lacked self-worth, and thus couldn't love herself, resulting in her inability to see how much she truly meant to Homura, the girl who loved her with all her heart, and didn't want a world without Kaname Madoka. Rather than attempting to find a solution outside of the magical girl system, they used it again and again, just causing more burdens to be unleashed into the world. From how I'm talking about the series, you could still view it as a sort of punishment of foolish girls, but the series makes it abundantly clear that these mistakes are part of their path toward growth. Something highlighted by Madoka's mother is how they need to make these mistakes in order to grow. After all, they learn something after every mistake. Madoka, throwing away Sayaka's soul gem, discovers a truth Kyubey purposely kept from them. Sayaka recognizes her mistake after the world resets. If Madoka were really what she thinks it is, for what reason does Sayaka return and learn her lesson? Madoka's wish to become God was one of the biggest mistakes, and not what she needed to do in order to solve the problem. Yet it was still her attempt to grow past the girl who sat on the sidelines, fearing she'd be of no use. Each mistake brings the girls closer to realizing what it's like to be adults. To make the message even more clear of the ultimately hopeful nature of Madoka, we can look at the words of the TV series ending, saying how you are not alone, or even the signature connects, having lines like, "My heart awakens in order to depict the future. Even if I halt on a tough road, the beautiful blue sky always waits for me. Therefore, I'm not afraid. I won't be disheartened anymore. No matter what happens, always look forward to tomorrow." That makes it abundantly clear, despite the dark nature of Madoka, the story is ultimately going to reach a positive end after the tough road they must walk. The themes of the series are actually still in line with other Magical Girl series, even if it tries to critique some aspects. DDC, while at least using interviews, is still injecting words into the creators' mouths.
The people that created it may not have had pure intentions. In fact, the conception of Madoka itself may have been more a malicious act than anything else. There's this sort of weird undertone to the way Urobuchi talks about the series. His attitude at times feels almost spiteful, like he's a little too happy to have created a series that tortures little girls. What Sayaka tells us is that we should shun and pity girls who would believe in such a silly fantasy. That there's something wrong with a young lady being naive and hopeful, wanting to ally with justice and heal the person she fancies. What girls like this need is a slap on the wrist, a reminder not to dream too big lest they crash and burn. There's something sinister about it when you pull back and look at Madoka not as a story to consume and enjoy, but as a work of fiction that expresses the views of the author. I can't pretend I know what kind of person Gen Urobuchi is, or what he thinks and feels, but when I consider his comments and the nature of his work, I begin to feel that Madoka is less a deconstruction of the magical girl genre and more a mockery of it. And so, ultimately, I have to come to the conclusion that Madoka is good, actually. The people who wrote it just might be a little, bad.
If you read the interviews, there's nothing of the sort pointing to the enjoyment of little girls suffering, or that the series feels like it's mocking traditional magical girl stories, which she claims the series, alongside Urobuchi's words, feels like. I received a request to write a bloody story where magical girls appear and then drop out one by one. I paid attention to the aspects that are troubling or overlooked in the traditional magical girl genre. I've been thinking that magical girls who have acquired superhuman abilities will find themselves removed from the world, which would cause contradictions and reactions. Magical girls who are full of hope and who strive to save the world soon suffer from hatred and jealousy, which turn them into enemy witches. The change from good to evil left an emotional impact. For example, Al-Qaeda brought down the Twin Towers due to their self-righteousness. Justice for some people isn't evil for others. Good intentions, kindness, and hope will not necessarily make people happy. These words don't support her arguments. It doesn't mean they like having them suffer, or that the series doesn't have a positive message, just because it explores some of the consequences of misplaced hope and good intentions. The kicker is when DDC constantly asserts how she can't know what the creators were truly thinking, yet says the series was only made to stomp on the hopes and dreams of little girls, and that the series expresses the views of the author. She doesn't know what the creators truly think, but still tries to postulate on their beliefs. Not to mention the kind of story Madoka was something axed by someone else. Who knows what the staff would have done with the freedom to do whatever. There's so many different factors. It makes me wonder, what does guessing and speculating even add to the video? It's just information that can possibly taint the reputation of another person to a viewer who doesn't know any better for no real reason. You can criticize a piece of media without defacing the person who made it. That's not even to mention, there's way more guys who have their hands on it. Directors, producers, original creator, key animators, editors, background artists, etc. They all have creative input on the series in one way or another. Even the smallest things from different people can add up or change the tone and feel of things. So you can't just pin something you don't like on one person because it may or may not even be from them. For example, in episode 5 and 6 of Shirobako, there's artistic debates over the use of CG. One person wants it hand-drawn, and another person believes in the use of CG. While it's resolved in the show in a manner both sides can agree on, in actual anime production, a settlement of choices like that may not be as clean. It could end in something a party disagrees with. Shirobako has numerous examples throughout of group effort and decision making. Who voices a character? How much time should be allowed to polish something? Should a show have an anime original ending? Is this accurate to the source material? Does this feel like something the characters would do? These group decisions may not always be positive, because while there's a gag of someone wanting to pick a seiyuu just because they had nice boobs and butts, there are real-world examples of people making bad decisions because of bias, or really any reason to be honest, which can fundamentally change an aspect of a show. Hell, Berserk 2016 is an example of this. It tried to be a 2D 3D hybrid under the notion of it being the only way to capture Miura's highly detailed art, but because of numerous issues in production, it ended up looking how it did. One major thing was how collectively, they couldn't settle on how it should look, which caused a massive loss in time. It wasn't because such a feat couldn't be done, just look at Beastars or Land of the Lustrous, but because they ultimately weren't equipped for it, and multiple things fell through. A huge contributing factor was how Studio Gemba, a studio that specializes in 3D CG, had never been in charge of a full-length anime production. They weren't aware of how difficult the task would be. There's no way you could, as I've seen Super Eyepatch Wolf do in his Berserk 2016 video, just pin it on the director and say it was because of his lack of experience with 3D. As an Anime News Network article reveals, he was ultimately very set on the animation style being the hybrid it is, but Super Eyepatch Wolf assumes it was just his fault, when the studio he was working with is versed in 3D. So it's not just his failing, but also people in the studio for biting off more than they can chew. The president was aware it was a difficult task, but ultimately decided to follow through with it. What's interesting is how multiple 3D Berserk adaptations had been greenlit before, so it's not a completely uncommon idea that doing the story's art justice in an anime would need good use of 3D. It's not a good idea to boil it down to being one person's fault. Luckily, Super Eyepatch Wolf has since corrected himself, but it still represents a problematic mindset many still carry. I think an even more potent example of the storytelling side on outside influence is Jump Magazine. Editors often ask for various changes to ensure the success of series. Let's specifically take Masashi Kishimoto, the creator of Naruto. He's had a bunch of changes from editors, cutting out a ton of exposition, putting in Sasuke, making the Land of Waves arc with Zabuza and Haku, stopping him from making the Hokage and teachers animals, having all the characters take the Chunin exams at once, turning Naruto from a fox into a human, among many others. As you can see, these things drastically change the story of Naruto, so you can't just look at a story from a narrow-minded bubble of one person is responsible for everything. And this isn't something that only happens with Jump or manga in general. There's different things that publishers are looking for, which may ultimately affect stories. Even more interestingly with Kishimoto is how you think a story with very idealistic messages and values would be one the creator fully stands by. But that's not necessarily true. When you read Kishimoto's 2015 interview from Kana, you'll see something very interesting. The interviewer says, "In the end, Naruto and Sasuke are two faces of the same problem. They're orphans, but they cope in completely different ways." And to paraphrase Kishimoto's response, he says how Naruto as the hero of the story must bear pain and loss, without succumbing to hate or vengeance as Sasuke did, though he feels Naruto's means of overcoming traumatic experiences are a bit idealist and naive, even saying he feels somewhat closer to Sasuke, and how he doesn't feel he could forgive someone who murdered his family, possibly even having a similar reaction if the same were to happen to him, while understanding Sasuke's actions weren't correct, that it bring hate, violence, and war. We can see how from his words, he still leans on his side a bit more than the conclusion of part 2 depicts. He even said how because it's a shonen manga, utopian idealism has to be written and defended. They must have hope above all. Kishimoto, with his audience in mind, and the magazine he's writing for, has his work be something that on some level isn't entirely what he feels. Artists in general have to make compromises in their work to be successful and in line with what their audience wants. To think you can know an artist from their work is naive. There's no telling in what parts they agree and do not agree with. If that's not enough for you, you can look at an author such as Ino Asano, who wrote Oyasumi Punpun and Solanin, two works that explore somewhat similar ideas but have entirely different conclusions. Oyasumi Punpun depicts a downward spiral of life from which Onodera Punpun never recovers from, whereas Solanin has a downward spiral from which its protagonist Meiko is ultimately able to move forward from. If you read Solanin, you could maybe think Asano thinks purpose can be regained no matter what, if you keep moving forward. If you read Punpun, you could think Asano thinks the opposite. This is why it's entirely unnecessary to speak on the behalf of the creator. There's no way you can accurately know their beliefs just from their works. Ino Asano ended up having two works that have conflicting messages, and as a reader, there's no means of really knowing his specific beliefs, and which one he may be more on the side of, unless he says it in direct words. Even then, you need to be careful when interpreting what they say, because in the Madoka example, nothing clearly points it towards what DDC said. When it comes to interpreting media, I can see the appeal of trying to get to know the creator and what they may think, but there has to be an acknowledgement you'll never really know them. A work, even if it's something the author overall agrees with, it could very well contain something they don't. There's also just a possibility they happen to just want to write something different than they usually do. Even as an amateur writer, I've certainly done things that deviate from what I'd prefer in a story on purpose, just to try something out. You never really know why something is the way it is, just by reading the story alone. This isn't to say the creator can't face criticism for something in their story, but you can't assume it's what they believe. The only exception is being blatant propaganda, or ideology/opinion pieces. Otherwise, it's really strange to attempt to put words in the mouths of creators. In a lot of discourse, you'll see call-out posts from people trying to morally high ground something, like saying Horikoshi's a pedophile, It's just something people say because fictional drawings of characters within the series make them uncomfortable. Rather than recognizing it's a personal grievance, they feel the need to assert a claim with such magnitude. People also just like to do it because they don't like something, so they'll say whatever they feel of the creator. The person who called out Tabata will feel the need to attack his character, yet says nothing on a series one could even more so attempt to say reflects on the creator's beliefs, being that of Monogatari. To be clear, I am absolutely not trying to imply the series carries the creator's beliefs. I'm just saying it's hypocritical of him to carry this idiotic idea of Asta meaning Tabata is an idiot too, while ignoring something else that, if we were to go by his logic, would be very yikes on the creator if we were to just assume whatever he wanted. I mean, I could do the same. I could label Togashi for having Palm go on a date with Gon, who is a minor, while ignoring it being a joke and how she's shown to be creepy. I could try and argue every author ever who wrote a revenge story is psychotic for thinking characters should just murder the opposition to solve their problems, despite that clearly not being how everyone who ever wrote a revenge story would be. Fiction is ultimately a tool to explore ideas and topics beyond ourselves through characters who do not exist. Stories can surpass one's own experiences, help them learn through writing for what they cannot act out, and to see other perspectives that aren't their own. To believe that they can only be the same as the people in their stories or carry the same beliefs is inherently missing the point. To a degree, it can even highlight one's own lack of imagination through not getting this concept. So maybe we can all stand to learn from these creators that see what lies beyond their own beliefs, experiences, and understandings through the stories they tell, or just shutting up and stop assuming you know them.